on the ground.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really nice to be with you all. I've enjoyed and learned from the earlier presentations. I'm speaking to you from Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the neutral peoples along the Grand River. I'm going to show you my slides as well, and I am hoping that they're going to advance. Can you see all my slides? Okay. Yeah.
Yep, this is good, thank you.
That's great. My approach to my presentation is from an academic and an activist. I'm doing my doctoral research on military missions and global climate governance, and I'm a longtime activist in the environmental, peace, and feminist movements in Canada. Last month, the Trudeau government announced that Canada is going to buy the F-35 fighter jet, 88 new fossil fuel powered stealth fighters for a price tag of $19 billion. The life cycle cost is $77 billion. This is the second most expensive procurement in Canadian history. The F-35 is also the most expensive weapon system in human history at a cost of $1.7 trillion. The other countries that have bought this fighter jet include the United Kingdom, Netherlands, Italy, Norway, Australia, among others. In Canada, 12 years ago, we launched a struggle against the federal government buying new fighter jets, and we're still in this struggle because the contract hasn't yet been signed. In Canada, Indigenous people have been resisting fighter jets and military installations, especially since the Second World War. And I'm going to speak more to you about two cases. So this is a map from the Department of National Defense, and it shows 36 military installations and bases across the country. And in my presentation today, I'm going to focus on two Air Force bases, one in Cold Lake, Alberta, and the other in Goose Bay, Newfoundland, Labrador. Now, the Canadian military, like other militaries in your countries, are state institutions of patriarchy and extreme violence against women, the environment, and other countries. This is very much intersectionality of insecurity and instability. The Canadian military, you might have seen in the news at the very upper echelons, the leaders have been implicated in gender-based violence. Over the past year, I have been to Cold Lake twice, and not only is it highly militarized, it is also highly industrialized. So the Air Force Base is situated on Indigenous territory, but it's also located in one of the main regions of the tar sands. This is a petroleum project that is the largest one on the planet. A little bit of historical background. In 1952, the federal government expropriated, effectively stole 3 million acres of land from the Treaty 6 nations. And it compensated the people very minimally for 8 years. And then the federal government stopped making payments to the Indigenous community in 1960. And it also failed to return the land, though it said it was going to. So from 1960 until 1991, the Indigenous communities, they protested, they appealed, they marched, they blockaded, they tried to get their land back. Finally, in 1991, there was a land claims inquiry that was held. And if you read the testimonies of the Indigenous members there, it's very heartbreaking. They talk about the despair, the impoverishment from the dispossession of their land. The inquiry made a recommendation that the federal government had to negotiate a settlement with the Indigenous communities, but it took 14 years for the federal government to finally settle in 2005. And a very minimal multi-million-dollar payment was made, but it was too little, too late. I was in Cold Lake at the beginning of this month, and this is the entrance to the air weapons range. So this is 3 million acres of land, and it is used for fighter jet training. The land is strafed, shot at, bombed, torpedoed, And this is the land that the indigenous people traditionally had used for hunting and gathering. This is where their ancestors are buried. And this is where they would traverse to follow the caribou. They would have summer camps and winter camps. So this is at the front entrance of the main gate of the Air Force weapons range. And if you look on the right through the trees, you see some glimmering silver. These are the pipelines that run along the air weapons range. So the land is also fracked and drilled. There has been, over the past decade, many incidents of spills and leaks and uncontrollable flaring. There is vast contamination of the land. And there is one road between the air weapons range and 50 kilometers into the town of Cold Lake. And on this road, it is dotted by these oil tanks, these black oil tanks. In the town is the entrance for the Air Force Base. And every time I go there to do a little bit of research, I also do a little bit of activism, and I put up my sign, "No fighter jets, green jobs, not war jobs." This is at a public park just at the entrance of the Air Force Base, and you can see in the background a fighter jet that's been mounted. And within about 15 minutes, the military police will come and make me take down my signs. In the middle of the town is an intersection, a main intersection that also has a mounted fighter jet. And I also will protest there with my signs. Cold Lake is a town of 11,000 people. There are 3,000 Indigenous people, and they have been separated into 4 parcels of reserve land. Most of the reserves are unpaved, and every time that I go into Cold Lake, I always make an effort to meet with Indigenous leaders and other community activists. This is Mervyn Grandbois, a well-known activist, Indigenous activist, and this is Nancy Scanny, who is a matriarch, elder, and water keeper. I was at her house at 9 o'clock in the morning one day, and a fighter jet flew over her house. It was so loud that we had to stop our conversation to let it pass. And she said to me, you know, "This is why I'm going deaf. This is why I'm losing my hearing." And she also recounted the many times that she's seen fighter jets dump fuel on the boreal forest and on the many lakes in the region as they practice different maneuvers and training. Before I should also say that on these Indigenous reserves, many of the people, you know, have poor housing, unpaved roads, and you probably are aware in Canada there are many Indigenous communities that don't have potable water, and Canada is investing in new fighter jets when First Nations communities have really important security needs that need to be met. The other case that I would like to talk about quickly is the Goose Bay Air Force Base and Air Weapons Range in Labrador, and this is on the East Coast, on the Atlantic Ocean. In the late 1970s, Canada started to allow foreign fighter jet training, especially from the NATO members. Now, NATO countries in Europe were not able to do low-level fighter jet training in Europe because it was so disruptive and it was prohibited, but they came to Labrador to do this training. Now, again, the federal government expropriated this land for the Air Force Base and the Air Weapons Range. This is unceded Innu territory. It's called Nitassinan. And not only is this land highly militarized, but again, it is highly industrialized with mines and dams and railways to extract the natural resources from this Indigenous territory. From the 1980s on, the Innu people have protested, they have marched, they have rallied, they blockaded the runways, and it has been so disruptive, this fighter jet training, both in Cold Lake and in Goose Bay. These are low-level training areas, so the fighter jets are able to fly as low as 100 feet. That's 30 meters, just over the tree line. This is a picture from the Innu people blockading the runways, and they have been imprisoned and arrested in the 1980s and the 1990s. The Innu women, mothers with small children, were, repeatedly arrested and imprisoned, for weeks. And this movement by the Innu people was very much led by the women. And one of them is named Chakuesh Elizabeth Panashaway. And she said that fighter jets shattered their happiness. 3 years ago, Chakuesh Panashaway published her memoirs. They're absolutely beautiful, called I Keep the Land Alive. And she documents this protracted struggle of trying to stop the flying of fighter jets on her land, the militarization of her land, and talks about the Innu culture and what she's done to try to protect it. And it's absolutely moving, and I'd encourage you to read her book. The same year, Bob Bortel wrote a children's book called Nutui's Cap about this struggle by the Innu people against the fighter jets, and it's written in English as well as the native language. In February of this year, the United Nations Human Rights Council did a call for submissions for the militarization of Indigenous land, and I did a 5-page submission about the militarization of Indigenous Canadian land, and this is on the WILP Canada website. In February, I also prepared a 40-page report called Soaring: The Harms and Risks of Fighter Jets and Why Canada Must Not Buy a New Fleet. And I list some of the environmental and social and financial harms of investing in a new fleet of fighter jets. And included in this report as well is a gender-based analysis and a focus on sexualized violence in the military and the sexualization of warplanes. And I would be happy to send you a link for this report. And again, it's on the WILP Canada website. In this report, I also include a graphic. This is from the Marshall Mining report that was done in 2020, and it shows all of the critical minerals that are used in the F-35. The F-35, as well as all fighter jets, they consume and burn a specialized fuel called JP-8. The F-35 uses 18,000 pounds of fuel in one flight, and this is the amount of fuel that a car would use in a whole year. Now, fighter jets like the F-35 cannot fly from North America to Europe or to Asia without aerial refueling, and so they fly alongside these tankers, and they should be considered pipelines in the sky. So if we look to see how Canadian fighter jets and other NATO countries have used their fighter jets since the end of the Cold War, over the past 30 years, they've been used to bomb the former Yugoslavia, Libya, Afghanistan, and which has caused tremendous death and devastation. And they've also been used for NATO air policing along Russia's borders, for instance, over the past 8 years, that have very much provoked attention and have contributed to the war that we see in the Ukraine. Just recently, the Trudeau government has announced that Canadian fighter jets are going to go back to Europe for NATO exercises and operations, and we're very concerned about how this is going to prolong the war that we see in Eastern Europe right now. The Canadian military, as all militaries, are the largest consumers of petroleum products in the state, and the largest emitter of carbon emissions. And in Canada, it gets the largest budget among all federal departments. So the Department of National Defense in my country accounts for 30% of the departmental budget, and it accounts for 61% of all federal government emissions. So we believe it's essential to demilitarize, to decarbonize. And finally, there's a coalition of groups that have been working, like I said, over for more than a decade. Our website is nofighterjets.ca. We're a coalition of peace and social justice groups, and we believe that the hope lies in connecting demilitarization with decarbonization and decolonization. We want disarming of the skies. We want land back to Indigenous people for genuine reconciliation. We want a feminist peace and climate justice. Thanks very much.
Yes, indeed.